is because even if you're not in emissions, this is pertinent to engine repair, it's pertinent to engine performance because emissions is related to engine repair and engine performance. So we're going to run through a little bit of this right here. Moving anything takes power. And most vehicles have internal combustion engines. You know, you kind of got some of them that don't. Let me back up. All right. And engines burn fuel. Burn fuel makes emissions. And so what you have here, the air around us is 21% oxygen and 78% nitrogen. Who knew that already? Did you know that mix? 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen. You're going to be able to remember that if I hit you with a pop test. Are you? All right. A cup of gasoline has got the explosive power of a stick of dynamite if it's vaporized and if it's ignited properly. And so basically what you have here is you've got fuel going into the engine, and the engine processes that fuel to create power. It goes out to the drive shaft, turns the wheel, and you got your exhaust going out the back. Trapping atomized gasoline with the right amount of air causes a controlled burn that heats the nitrogen, which is the inert gas that won't burn, 78% of the air, triggers the expansion of that nitrogen, and that drives the piston down. Now, how many of you knew that the burn heats up the nitrogen and the nitrogen is what pushes it down? You never hear it that way, do you? That's a totally different way of looking at it. All right, so atomizing the fuel, carburetors use atmospheric pressure and airflow to move the fuel. You got atmospheric pressure pushing on the fuel in the bowl. You basically got a jet here, and you got a little this thing coming up, and so when that air goes across there, this isn't really a good drawing of that. When the air goes across there, you can take a piece of hose, Timothy, pay attention. Well, you can take a piece of hose and dip that piece of hose in a bucket, and you can blow an air nozzle across that from an angle, right? And if the air is passing across that hose, it's going to start pulling that liquid out of there. You can actually do this out here in the shop. Get you some water, stick a hose in there, blow across that hose from this angle, and water will start coming out of there. You're creating low pressure. That's how a carburetor works. All right, so as you open that throttle and that more air is coming in there, it's bringing that gas in there. Of course, it goes through the manifold, and it gets, when the intake valve opens, it goes in there with the air, and it squeezes it and lights it off and all that. Fuel injectors use high pressure in a special orifice in a pedal. So you got pressure on there. On the plain old fuel injection systems, you typically have about 40 psi, sometimes 60, sometimes 70. Depends on what vehicle it is. Most of them's about 40. The old throttle body injection Chevys, 12 pounds. And if the throttle body injection Fords though had 40 pounds, so it was a different type of injector. Okay, but anyway, the point is if you're getting on it on that Chevy with the 12 pounds and it feels like it's got a potato in the exhaust, a lot of times it's because the fuel filter stopped up. That's the only thing that feels that way. What does a fuel filter stop up feel like on just about any other car, like on one with a carburetor? I mean, is a stopped up fuel filter or a clogged fuel filter, partially clogged, going to cause it to be hard to start? No. It's not going to be causing it hard to start. Where you're going to feel that is when you're in the throttle going around something really hard and it starts to, the transmission filter stopped up, it'll make the transmission quit pulling. So if it's needing fluid, it can't get because of the clogged filter. Fuel injectors use high pressure in a special orifice and pedal design. All right. What happens in the chamber doesn't stay in the chamber. All right. So basically, what you got here, and that video is supposed to play. I may bail out of here and go to the actual video if I can make that. If I can't get it to play like I want it to. All right. See that? All right. Now we're going to slow it down. All right. Watch this now. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. It's hard to do it when it's moving that fast. Now, as it slows down a little more, it's going to slow down more. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Memorize that. Get it in your mind. That's why I got this showing over and over again. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. See how those valves open and the exhaust goes out? Intake. Now the air fuel sprays. It's stored for a minute. If you got gasoline direct injection, it's going straight in there with really high pressure, like 800 to 5,000 pounds or whatever. But anyway, so intake, compression, power, and exhaust. See, it's pulling the air in, right there. lights it off, the nitrogen expands and pushes it down. But I will tell you this, a gasoline engine is just slapping the top of the piston. All the fire is usually gone out by about 25 degrees after top dead center. And that's crankshaft rotation. A diesel engine, the fuel burns all the way down, so it's pumping that crank. That's why you got such legendary torque with a diesel. On a gas engine, you're slapping it. See? All right. So anyway, now let me back out of that and go back to my presentation here, where I was. Slideshow. All right. I'm gonna bounce through all those. All right. So whatever happens in the chamber doesn't stay in the chamber. Burning wood makes smoke. Now in Germany, you probably know about this, some vehicles use the smoking gases in their internal combustion engines to drive the engine. Wood burning cars. You know about that? And one of the reasons I knew about it, you can look it up, that's a wood burning car right there, of German design. You had to burn wood and start some of that producing wood smoke, and it would use that wood smoke in the engine to actually light it off. Now, the guy that owned the dealership that I worked for 25 years was a guy named Fred Bondi, and he was from Germany. And he had us take a 1974 Ford pickup truck, and he built this stuff to go in the back of it, and we had a wood burning truck that we drove in parades for a while. But it was German technology. That's what they did, some of their military equipment and all too. The wood makes more smoke than other wood, though some does, because of the composition of the wood. You've seen the smoke coming off the wood. But in gasoline, we want to mix the burn really clean, so it has to be right. If you don't have it, like on a torch, when we're lighting a torch out here, if you have too much acetylene coming out there, you see that black sticky smoke coming off of it. Well, if you dial it down, that smoke goes away. And if you got a neutral flame, you got no smoke at all. And so basically that's what you're going to do. So there's two measures, weight and volume. By volume, you got 9,000 gallons of air, 1 gallon of fuel. If you're going by volume. And that is a huge difference right there. By weight, 14.7 parts air to 1 part fuel. So you got 14.7. Now 14.7 is equal to the barometric pressure at sea level. This is PSI. Now over there where you're from, you use bar. 1 bar is 14.7 PSI. You see what I'm saying? Now you use millibars and this kind of thing. But the point is, this is balance. You notice this number is higher than that one, but that little scale is showing balance. You got that? All right. All right, so you got to get the mixture right in the first place. Now, that's the 14.7 one. That's called stoichiometry. Can you spell that word? Stoichiometry, stoichiometric. That's the ratio. We got oxygen, O2, nitrogen, and the fuel, and hydrocarbons, all going into the mix together. You got hydrocarbons, and then you got, look at that, all of this nitrogen and just a little bit of oxygen going in there. Remember I told you 28% oxygen? I probably should have put 3 of those O2s instead of
28%.
21%, I'm sorry, 21%, yeah, you're right. I did this right. I got crossed up on my stupid numbers. 21% oxygen, 78%. Nick is a math whiz. He's going to remember numbers. All right, what happens to the gases? All right, hydrocarbons, and you got your air coming in, which is your nitrogen and oxygen. Engine exhaust system, what should come out? CO2 and H2O. Have you ever noticed how they're always having to cut the grass along the sides of the road? You know why? Because the cars are feeding it. All that CO2, that grass loves it, man. Just give me some more. And it just grows and grows. There was a lady that's a weather expert that was giving a presentation down in Florida when I was at Max Convention. And I went up there and I says, so how do you know if you're convinced about global warming or whatever? What makes you think CO2 is causing it? And I'm just an automotive instructor. She's a scientist with a PhD. And what's the answer you think she gave me? She said, well, that's the only thing we can measure that seems to have any correlation to it. Seriously? I mean, isn't that weak? You know what I mean? And I said, well, let me ask you something. Don't the plants and the trees and all like CO2? She says, oh yeah, they're doing really well. Sounds to me like we're going green by making more CO2, you know what I mean? Well, she really couldn't convince me that it was a problem. But what happens is when it gets a little warmer, there's more CO2 comes as a result of that. They don't really like for you to look at the graph that way, right? Oh, anyway. Engine and exhaust system, what should come out? Ideally though, now this is important to understand. Every hydrocarbon molecule will get married to two oxygen molecules, which make CO2. And H2O is a byproduct as well. H2O is water, right? You might see these websites that are talking about, what do they call it? They got a dihydrogen oxide or whatever. What do they call it? There was a name they have for water that makes it sound really horrible, you know. I can't ever pull it up whenever I want to think about it. Anyway, whenever you get your mix where there's not as much air, like if there's not enough air and there's too much hydrocarbon, you wind up with CO, which means that each molecule only got one molecule of oxygen, and some of them got none, so you got HC. So HC and CO. HC is your black smoke. You pull the spark plugs out. If you ever pull a spark plug out and seen it sooty and black, I'm talking about dry soot. That is running rich. That is too much fuel, not enough air. Right? Now, if it's wet, if it's got way under more fuel than it needs going in there, it's going to basically be soaking wet and, you know, sooty too. I mean, it won't be what you call soot, it'll just be just wet and black, you know. So it's too rich, too much fuel, or not enough oxygen to go around, so some HC molecules don't find oxygen partners, or they might find only one. Okay? A rich mixture is cool, and a lean mixture is hot. Okay, so if you've got a rich mixture in a combustion chamber, it's not going to be as hot as a lean mixture. A hot and lean mixture joins nitrogen and oxygen and makes NOx. The reason we put a little X right there is because the oxygen and the nitrogen, when they get bound together, it can be, this number could be any of several different numbers. You know, this little subscript, that would be NO2, NO3, NO whatever. You know, and amongst all that is your nitrous, like you'd put in your race car, but there's not enough of it to do anything. Here's a graph. You get a grip on that. Your best torque and your best power is here, right? Well, when you're in closed loop, your target range is right here. And it's constantly dialing the fuel back and forth so that it keeps it in its range right here. Now this right here is basically saying, giving you your air-fuel ratio and your, other part of the graph. But NOx is here. These are parts per million. Hydrocarbon is measured by parts per million. And CO is measured in percentage. Okay? So 14.7 to 1 is the green band. That's where you want to run. Your race cars and your hot rods are going to be over here. Right? Your off-road stuff. Now the nasty three is hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and NOx. The carbon monoxide you will not smell, you will not see, but you will die. There's enough of it. Here's a funny thing. Back in 2003, there was this farmer that he had a 78 or 77 Ford pickup, and he would back it into his chicken house and he'd let it idle for a while and he'd kill like 10,000 chickens. And then he would file on his insurance that 10,000 chickens died and he didn't know why. I mean, that's what he was doing, Well, he traded that 78 Ford pickup in on a 2003 Ford pickup, and he brought it back about 3 weeks later and said, I don't like this truck because it won't kill my chickens. So he would back that 2003 Chevy or Ford pickup in there, and he would crank it up, and he would let it idle until it ran out of gas, and the chickens were still running around because it wasn't hurting anything. The emission controls were taking care of it. You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's a true story. I didn't make that up. And this one guy, I was at GM school, and this one guy was talking about, he sued GM because he tried to commit suicide, and he ran a tank of gas out of his Buick in his garage with the door closed, and he woke up with a bad headache 8 hours later, and it didn't kill him. And he was just letting it run with the doors closed. Well, I'm telling you, the emission control stuff is really a good thing. You know what I'm saying? All right, so what triggers the burn? The hydrocarbons and the oxygen are a volatile mix, right? It takes a spark. And sometimes the cylinder head and its carbon are hot enough the mix will light off before the spark happens, and that's called detonation. How many of you guys have ever heard a vehicle diesel when you shut it off? You turn it off and it keeps trying to run. Doom, 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 doom. You may not have heard that because most of the time fuel injection engines don't do that. I've seen a few of them do it. I saw an Explorer, a 91 Explorer, do that one time. It came into my service bay. It was diesel when you shut it off, but it was because the EEC power relay had stuck closed. And it was keeping the engine controller awake, but when you turned off the key, you killed the power going to the ignition coil. So the spark plugs weren't firing, but it was still putting fuel in there because it was still seeing RPM. And the engine controller's looking at RPM, squirting fuel in there, and the carbon and stuff on the head was hot enough to where it would light off the mix just because of the heat, and it would keep trying to run. Now, it wasn't running good enough to drive it, but it would go doom, 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 just keep on doing that. And you know, there's a bunch of different reasons that old carbureted cars used to do that. If they were out a little too fast, or if the timing was too fast, something like that, you know. Now, NOx prevention, we keep the mix balanced to prevent HC and CO. So how do we prevent NOx? So we need the combustion chamber to stay below 2,500 Fahrenheit, which is 1371 Celsius for our partner over there, right? So you want it to be below that temperature, and that's why you're going to keep it from blending the oxygen and the nitrogen together. All right, now this right here is a little illustration. Whenever the spark plug's running like it should, it's going to look like that. Whenever it's running too rich or not firing at all, it's going to look like that, and that's way yonder rich there. By the time it gets to looking like this, it ain't firing. You pull a plug out that looks like that, this spark plug may or may not be the cause of the problem, but if you see a plug like that, it hasn't been fired either because the plug itself is bad, there's no spark going to the cylinder, no compression, something. And then when it gets too hot, you're going to see that it's cooking it like that right there. All right, into the slideshow. What do you think? Here's what we do. Let me tell you this. Let me go through this. EGR, exhaust gas recirculation. We come off the exhaust manifold, come through the EGR valve, and we feed some inert exhaust gas right behind the throttle plate so that every cylinder gets an equal amount of it. What you're supposed to get always is an equal amount of everything to every cylinder. Equal amount of air, equal amount of fuel, equal amount of exhaust gas recirculation. Remember this, EGR never flows when you're idling, and it never flows at wide open throttle. Some engines, you might notice that old Escort over there was built without an EGR valve because they could satisfy NOx requirements without an EGR valve. A lot of your Jeep Cherokees with the 4-liter won't have EGR on them. And so some of them do, some of them don't. If they don't have it, it's so they make. I used to see some 2.9-liter Fords that didn't have EGR because they didn't have to have it in order to satisfy those emission standards from back in the year model. All right, hydrocarbons that come from, now you guys know what blow-by is, right? Blow-by, going by the rings. You know, some of it goes by the rings whenever you're, you know, it's firing. Some of it goes by when it's just compressing, and that's hydrocarbons. That's basically gasoline vapors in the crankcase. Now, back in the day, they used to just put a piece of pipe that was running out of the crankcase, and it had a slanted cut, so that whenever the air was going by, it would create a low pressure, like I was talking about with the hose, that would pull that out of there. But it was going out in the air, and in big cities like Los Angeles and Chicago and places, you know, it was terrible. So they started in the early 60s with the Corvair. I read in an encyclopedia somewhere, Corvair was the first one that had PCV. So they get the PCV valve, and it basically pulls a vacuum through the PCV valve on the crankcase to get rid of that blowback. If everything's clogged up and you don't have any way the crankcase can breathe, you ever seen oil in the breather? That's because the PCV system ain't working right. All right, so if you got oil in the breather, I always like to take the PCV closure hose off, which is the one that's on the opposite side valve cover from the PCV valve, put my thumb over it, I ought to feel a little vacuum there. If I'm not feeling a little vacuum there, that PCV system's not working. You better do something about that. I had this guy one time, he resealed an entire engine. And whenever they gave it to me after he resealed it, I found out the PCV system was totally clogged. And the reason he had to reseal it was because there was so much pressure in the crankcase it blew every seal. Valve cover gaskets removed, rear main was blown, front seals leaking, pan gasket leaking. But he resealed everything, but he didn't even check to see why it happened, why it blown all the seals. So that's really important too. Oxygen sensor feedback is really important to keep that 14.7 to 1. After a burn goes into the exhaust, oxygen sensor is going to be looking for a particular target, which is usually half a volt on the old zirconia sensors, and it's slightly different on the wideband sensors. But the point of the matter is, it's basically going to be dialing fuel trim up and down, short fuel trim up and down. If short fuel trim gets way out of line so that it can't handle it, long fuel trim starts to click up a notch or two. And when it gets up to the point where short fuel trim comes back in the middle, you know, you can look at your scan tool. If you want to really see if you got a problem with your balance, look at long fuel trim, because short fuel trim may look just fine. Long fuel trim is going to tell the tale, okay? And you're going to run into this while we're out here scan tooling things, so be ready for that. Now that's the first day of emissions class to kind of give you an idea of what emissions are all about. The evaporative system handles evaporating gasoline from the gas tank. Stores it in there, and you got a picture of it right here. It stores it in there, and it pulls it out every now and then. Back in the day, it would purge the canister when the EGR was flowing. Both of them were getting vacuumed at the same time. Nowadays, it purges the canister whenever it decides it wants to. They do it when you're sitting there idling. And if somebody's packing their gas tank, they're liable to get some liquid gas in that canister, starts purging it. Too much gas all of a sudden, the engine tries to die, the idle air control catches it, and it can make it surge ahead, just about run into the car in front of it at a red light if it starts purging when you're idling. And it'll do that sometimes because it can do that. You're going to look at some of your scan tools, and you're going to talk about purge-free cells. So you got to know if it's purging or not if you're going to be able to troubleshoot anything. If it's purging, and then whenever this one guy came in, he says, this thing tries to stall on me sometimes. And I looked at it and I watched it until it started purging, and I heard it stumble. I said, are you packing your gas tank, George? Oh yeah, I always do. I said, stop that. Stop putting gas in it when it's full, and you won't have that problem. And he called me later and he said it took care of it. Anybody got any questions? We're just about done. Lunchtime. All right then. Would you pass the test on it if I gave you this tomorrow?
I can try.
You could? You'd do good on the numbers, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
All right then.
Most definitely.
Yeah. All right. All right. We're going to knock off and go